Okay, welcome everybody to the Agency Profitability Audit Framework webinar. My name is Chris Hervishon. It is a pleasure to have you this afternoon and really looking forward to presenting this to you all. So, goals for today. Number one, we're going to define profitability, what it is and what it isn't. Number two, how to define if you have a profitability problem. Number three, the 5 steps of our profitability audit framework. Number four, the 5 questions to ask yourself about each step of the audit profitability framework. Number 5, suggestions for tactics to go deeper. And then number 6, Q&A as time allows. If you would, just please go ahead and put any questions that you have during the course of the webinar in that Q&A box. I'll monitor that through the webinar. I'll either hold those to the end or answer those as I'm going through it, if that makes sense at that time. And the slides will be available for everybody after the webinar. We'll send those out and the recording will be available as well for your reference. It'll also be uploaded on our site. So here's the fun stuff, the obligatory disclaimer from our insurance company. Basically what this says is this is not specific advice for your agency and we are not held liable for that. And everybody's situation is different. So please do be mindful of that. Just want to take a quick minute to introduce our team. Special thank you to Elise, who updated this slide today for us. So this has been a thorn in my side as we add new team members. I am not a graphic designer by any stretch of the imagination. So we've got 4 staff accountants on our team. We've got Elise, who's brand new to the team this week. She is our digital and social media coordinator. Brandy's our BA. And then we've got Jeff as well, who is our business development rep. So that is the team. We are 8 strong, including myself. So let's get into it. Pre-work, what exactly is profitability? Profitability is net income, net margin, net profit, or otherwise known as the bottom line. You'll probably hear it called all of these things in your agency or in the industry. Everybody calls it a little bit something different, but basically when you look at your profit and loss statement, what is the absolute bottom line? That's why it's called the bottom line. What does that net income say in QuickBooks parlance or whatever sort of accounting software that you're using? It is that number over that specific time that you are looking at it. What it is not cash flow. Cash flow and profitability are 2 completely different things, 2 completely different concepts. Cash flow is a cousin and a derivative of profitability, but cash flow is a much different animal. We do have a webinar that's out saved on our website, Cash Flow 101, if you want to dive deeper into what cash flow is and what it is not, but we're not talking about cash flow today. We're simply talking about profitability and basically how to increase that bottom line as it shows on your P&L. So that's the pre-work. Step number 1 is to assess whether or not you actually have a profitability problem. So how do we do that? Well, what you're looking at on the screen is data from ProfitSense. What ProfitSense is our benchmarking tool. It is the largest private company data set that is out there for financial data, and really great tool. So the data that's on the screen is for agencies, so marketing consulting services, that's the NAICS code that falls under generally, with a revenue range of 1 million to 10 million, and that is across the US. If you're kind of looking at that table and you see that the number there in the blue parentheses, that is how many different companies make up that data subset. So if we're looking at the left-hand column, last 12 months of data, there are 85 different companies that identify as marketing consulting services. So basically agencies that fall into that data set. And the 2 highlighted numbers there are really what I want to draw your attention to. Net profit margin. So on average, we're looking at 13.44% for the last 12 months. That is a little bit lower than what we typically see with our agencies. We see a wide range, of course, but generally what we tell our agency clients is that you want to be somewhere north of 15, generally speaking. But every agency is different. Everybody's circumstances are different. The other number I want to point you toward is sales growth. And the point here is that both of those 2 things should be taken together. They provide context to each other. So what exactly does that mean? Well, as you are growing and as you are growing rapidly, what we would expect to see is that your agency would be less profitable on a net margin basis. The reason for that is because you're bringing on headcount, you're incurring a lot of expenses in anticipation of growth, in anticipation of delivering your services. And for some period of time there, you are going to be less profitable than if you are a very mature business, hopefully, which is very profitable. We're not going through a ton of growth, headcount's staying relatively stagnant or growing incrementally, not like 100%, 200%, not exponential growth. That's not what we're talking about. So theoretically, if you were a very mature agency who's got all of your processes and your systems and your headcount all figured out, you should be pretty profitable, right? You figured it out. And then you've grown to a point where it's a little bit more difficult to turn a big ship, so to speak. That exponential growth isn't really something that you're interested in or looking for. And exponential growth at some sort of size becomes fairly difficult. So we have to look at these two things within the context of each other. Now, one of the things that you'll hear kind of out there in professional services literature or on other podcasts or things like that is, well, we want to be around 40% and we add those two numbers together. What's interesting is when we add those two numbers together for the last 12 months for, the agency world, what we get is about 43%. So a little bit higher than 40. There's no magical number, or there's nothing magical about that 40% number. It's interesting, it's out there, which is why I bring it up. But generally speaking, if you were younger and you were growing very, very rapidly, we would expect to see that number a little bit lower than if you were a little bit more mature and not growing as rapidly, but have really good processes and systems in place and are very profitable. So you have to look at those two things within the context of each other. It's not enough to just, have a buddy who runs another agency and is just wildly profitable and you're just getting started, you're growing rapidly, you're having to bring on all these different expenses. Like you're in totally different places. So you need to understand what you're preparing for, where you're going, and what your overall trajectory is and what you expect it to be. So that's setting the tone there. That's step one. Just figure out whether or not you've got a problem based on what your trajectory is. Number two, do we have a revenue problem? And full disclosure, I'm an accountant, we are accountants, and we take an accounting bent to how we assess profitability and how we kind of work through this. So what we're doing is that we are starting at the top of the profit and loss statement, and we're going to work our way down, and then we're going to take a couple other considerations, a couple other factors into consideration here. But we're starting basically, once we've assumed that we have a profitability problem, we're starting with the top line. We're starting with revenue. And here are the 5 questions that are my favorite 5 questions that you should be asking yourself about your agency, about the profitability. Number 1, is your revenue high enough to support the benefit that you want or you need? And the way that I would think about that is, how much money do you want to make? Take your salary, so your owner's salary that you're being paid from the agency, and then add it to the bottom line times 15%. So in other words, let's just say that your agency is making $100,000 or has $100,000 in revenue. That's probably a bad example. Say $200,000. $100,000 of it is owner's salary. So the owner's taking $100,000 out. And let's just say that there's another $100,000 in there for other expenses and that sort of thing. And based on the $200,000, 15% net margin, that would be $30,000. Add that to your salary, which is $100,000. So you're taking $130,000 out of the agency. Is $130,000 what you really want to be making? If the answer is no, then you need more revenue. For sure. You don't have enough revenue to support the benefit that you ultimately want. And that's not even factoring in expenses and how you operate and what your headcount is and all that sort of stuff. It's just figuring out whether or not you actually have enough revenue to get you to the point, if you operated in an optimized way, where you'd be taking the benefit out. So the answer is no there. You've got a revenue problem. You need to start there. If you don't have revenue, you don't have a business. That's the key theme across all businesses, is that in order to actually have a business, you have to have revenue. So that's the first one. Number 2, and this is surprising how often we see this as an issue with agencies, but are you putting adequate sources toward marketing and sales? Very commonly, we will see an agency that says to us, we want to grow 100, 200, 300%, whatever it is. And then we go to do their budget. It's like, yeah, we're probably going to spend about $1,000 on marketing this year. Okay, you can do that, but an agency coming to me wanting to market accounting services, what they would probably tell me is, well, you want to budget somewhere between 2 and 10% of the revenue growth that you want over whatever period of time that's going to be. So as an agency, and you being the expert, it's got to be somewhere in that neighborhood too, right? That stands to reason. It can't be just like $1,000. You want to grow revenue by $5 million. It probably isn't going to work. So you need to put adequate resources to it. The other thing that we hear is, well, you're not going to see that necessarily in the P&L because the owner is devoting their time to marketing and sales, or somebody in the agency is devoting their time to marketing and sales. And if that person isn't a specific marketing or sales person, maybe that person has client relationship management type responsibilities. Maybe that person is responsible for delivery of some sort. If that person is now being focused toward marketing and selling the actual agency, that means that they are not doing the other stuff that really they're earmarked for, the other seat that they are filling too. So, yeah, that's one approach, but you just need to make sure that you're putting the right resources toward marketing and sales. You need to make sure that you're not also detracting from another area of the agency. So that's number 2. Number 3 is there a pricing process, framework, and methodology. Hopefully, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, we need some help, that you're not just sticking your finger in the air and seeing which way the wind is blowing and then pricing that engagement. That not a good thing. There needs to be some sort of a framework. There needs to be some sort of methodology, and it needs to iterate over time. Number 4, are you consistently increasing prices? If not, this is the silent profitability killer for sure. Think about the environment that we're operating in right now, a highly inflationary environment. Think about the expenses that go into delivering your service. If your prices remain the same, your contractors are probably charging you more. Your software subscriptions are probably going up. There are a number of things that are going to cost you more money over time. And what you're going to end up with is probably gross margin bleed, but definitely net margin bleed. Gross margin factors in all of the things that are going to be variable with delivering your service. Those are your contractors that you hire to complete specific client work. You're definitely going to get bleed if you are not increasing your prices, at least in line with the inflation that you are experiencing, for sure. And prices should increase over time on a consistent basis, for sure. That's number 4. Number 5 is the same person doing the pricing and the selling. The answer should absolutely positively be no. Now, if you have a smaller agency and the agency owner is doing the entire sales process, the entire marketing process, that is fine, but they should involve the team in the pricing discussions in some way, shape, or form and get that feedback, because ultimately what you will end up with are clients who are not priced appropriately. They come in too low, clients who are not appropriate for the agency that maybe the team doesn't like working with, or, clients that they're just not a good fit, right? And when you bring clients in that aren't a good fit and that also aren't being charged an adequate price, what you get is a recipe for disaster. It makes your employees stressed out. It makes it hard to deliver good work. And ultimately it makes your agency not nearly as profitable as it really should be. So that's what we're going to do when we're assessing revenue. Those are my top 5 questions. Step number 3 is operating expenses. These are the expenses that are going to be fixed for the most part. They're not going to be totally variable with doing the work. I mentioned contractors as a great example a couple of minutes ago. So when we're assessing OpEx, number 1 is each role. So the people who work in your agency, are they subjected to a consistent and ongoing compensation analysis process? And this is the one thing in this entire slide deck where it has the opportunity to actually reduce profitability, because you could find out this person is not being compensated fairly and we need to increase their wage, which ultimately is going to reduce profitability. However, what you will find is when people are not compensated fairly or effectively, they're subject to leave. And we all know that when people leave your business, it is highly expensive, it's very disruptive, and it creates all sorts of other problems, which will in fact impact profitability. So that's number 1. Make sure that there is a process in place on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're paying your people what they should be paid. And that also goes the other way too. Make sure you're not paying too much. There should be a process in place where, again, you're not just sticking your finger into the wind and seeing which way the wind is blowing. Number 2, software subscriptions. This is a big one. Now, your books, you need to have a vendor tied to every expense. And this is particularly important when we're looking at software subscriptions, because if you don't know where your money is going related to vendors, it makes it very, very hard to figure out, well, these things are duplicative. We need these things. We don't need these things, or just figuring out simply what something is. Software subscriptions are the low hanging fruit, because often what we see, number one, they are expensive. So there's some opportunity there. But number two, it is super easy in today's world to just sign up for one more subscription. You get subscription proliferation. And some of the things that you have in your agency are probably duplicative, probably. Some person over in this corner uses this piece of software because they prefer it. Some people over in the other corner uses this piece of software because they prefer it. Maybe they do the same thing. So there's always opportunity there. If you're looking to cut expenses, software subscriptions is like the number one place to go. Number three, meals, entertainment, travel, and conferences. Travel and conferences kind of go together. They're super important because they lead to your team doing better work. They lead to a more educated, more innovative team. That is always a good thing. That should make you more profitable over the long term. Meals and entertainment, that can get out of control in an absolute heartbeat. So this is a good case where industry benchmarks and looking at industry benchmarks can be a really good indicator of what you should be doing in these areas and whether or not you're kind of in the realm of what we'll call social norms related to other agencies. It's a really good place to look at, and it's a really good area that can get out of control in an absolute heartbeat. Number four, is there a purchasing policy and controls? Do you have an approval workflow? Great question. Is there a policy? Who can spend what on what and how much can they spend? There definitely needs to be a policy. It definitely needs to be stated. It definitely needs to be communicated to the entire team. Again, this is an area where things can get out of control in an absolute heartbeat. If there's an Amex that everybody shares in the office, it is super, super easy to start spending money on software subscriptions that you don't really need, and office meals that, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, that sort of stuff. But those two things go hand in hand for sure. And then number five, are you reviewing your financials on a consistent basis? If you are not, you're going to have a really hard time identifying where your money is actually going and whether it is on things that you need or don't need. You should absolutely positively be reviewing everything on a consistent basis. Just not paying attention to it, sweeping it under the rug, that is not going to help you for sure. When you're the clients that we find that are super engaged, that go through this process on a continuous basis, those are absolutely the ones who are going to be most profitable. And we have seen that time and time again. All right, step four, production management. Why do we call this production management? Well, not everybody's project-based. So production it is. This could be ongoing retainer type clients. This could be true project type clients where you're working with them, once in a blue moon or not on a consistent basis, once in a while, that sort of thing on specific projects. So number one, are pre-mortems happening? What's a pre-mortem? It's when you sit down and you figure out what exactly are we trying to accomplish with this project? What does success look like? What does good look like? Is there an after action review process? Super important. So at a super high level, you can ask two questions here with the team, whoever worked on this engagement or worked on this project. Number one, did we provide value to this client? Number two, did we extract adequate value in exchange for the value that we provided? Having that after action review is super, super important. And it should also include things such as, how did this go? How was the communication? Was it effective, not effective? What went wrong? What were the pain points? What went well? All of those things, document it, learn from it, and have some sort of a feedback loop going forward. Number three, is there an accountability process and mechanism? So that should work toward quality and it should work toward timeliness. If there's no accountability process, it's basically just the wild, wild west. And you can definitely, that's a silent killer of profitability as well. Number four, are you putting sufficient resources toward actually doing the work? This is an efficiency thing, and it's also a quality thing. It's hard to be profitable if you're not doing work in a timely manner and doing high quality work. And it's really hard to do work in a timely manner and do it at a very high quality if you don't have the appropriate resources. That is both people and tools. And then number five, is there a feedback loop to sales and pricing? Super, super important to have that feedback loop. Hey, you sold this project. It was a good fit. It wasn't a good fit. It took us way longer than we thought. We didn't get paid what we thought we should. Having that feedback loop is super important, and you're not going to get it right the first time, definitely. But over time, as you iterate, hopefully it makes you better. It makes pricing better. It makes delivery better. Got to have that feedback loop. All right, so that's number 4. Number 5, operations and management. So our process is documented and standardized. Again, this gets into efficiency for sure. Super important to have things documented and standardized. Now, we are in the creative realm, so a lot of things are going to be different from project to project, from client to client. Yeah, totally get that, but you can still document processes and you can still standardize them to some degree. Maybe it's as simple as how the intake works. It doesn't have to be standardized creative because that's not a thing. But standardizing the process and the framework around which you do your work, communicate with clients, and onboard and sell on all of those things. Super important. Number 2, is there an employee review mechanism and cadence? If there isn't, then how do employees know whether or not they're doing a good job? How do they know whether or not their expectations are being met? They don't. And when they don't, nothing good happens from that, frankly. Do you have clear job descriptions? Do your employees know what they should expect and what they should be doing? Are they operating within those roles? That's number 3. Number 4, do you have a documented hiring process? Does it work? Has it worked in the past? Are you iterating that as well? Are they a good culture fit? If the answer is no, you definitely have some work to do there. Having the right people in the right seats who can accomplish the work that you're selling, super important, obviously, for profitability. Number 5, does everyone in the agency have access to a scorecard? Does everybody have a number or numbers that they're managing to, that they are held accountable for? And do they know what those are? And are they public? If not, there's definitely opportunity for leakage there as well. So going deeper, we've got that framework. We've gone through the 5 steps. We've given you 5 questions that you can ask. How do you go deeper on that? Number 1, brainstorm other questions that you can ask. There are an unlimited number of questions that you can ask around these steps, for sure. Number 2, ask your team what and how questions to dig further into the details of where these things might be going wrong. Why do we ask what and how questions? You'll notice very few, if any, what and how questions on the slides previously. Those are to the agency owner, right? What and how questions are not accusatory, and they help you to frame a better question, and they help you to solicit feedback from your team. Super important. Number 3, use the 5 whys. That'll help you get to the root of the why something is the way that it is. And that comes straight out of a book, which I love, which is called A More Beautiful Question. Questions are the source of strategy. They're super important. And the 5 whys came out of Toyota, so the car manufacturer. But basically, if you ask 5 whys about a process or a certain situation, it'll at some point before that 5th one, you'll probably get to the root of what the problem really is. Super important. And then number 4, make sure that your agency has a clear data strategy. And then that will allow you to investigate all of the areas that I've already talked about. If you don't have a data strategy, if things are in disparate systems, if things don't map to each other, if you have just data systems that are generating data that don't talk to each other, it's going to be really, really hard to investigate all of these areas. So you do need to have a clear and consistent data strategy that's well thought out and that's integrated, that integrates all the data sources so you can actually make decisions based on and investigate based on the things that I've outlined. Additional resources on our website. You can go to betterwaycpa.com, go to resources, ebooks, guides, and more. We have an ebook out there. This is all free. Scaling the data-driven agency, that gets to the data point that I just made. How to recession-proof your marketing agency. Also did a webinar on that last month. Cash flow 101, I referenced that at the beginning of this webinar. Cash flow forecasting template, super important, and a cash flow reserves calculator. All of those resources and more are out there, and they're all free. So definitely do take advantage of those. So too long, didn't listen. Here are the key takeaways. Number 1, if you're going to assess profitability, you need to start at the top of the P&L, move your way down. So down and in. So we go from the top line, which is revenue, we go through, so down and through OpEx, and then we go in, meaning we dive deeper into the agency and the operations. That gets to the production point, that gets to the management point. That's what I mean by down and in. So down the P&L and then into the agency. Number two, we provided 5 questions to each section, but the number of options are limitless. You can brainstorm or question storm, as we call it, any number of questions, and that'll help you really to assess those 5 key areas. And then number 3, benchmarking and a consistent and robust financial process is an absolute must to be able to assess profitability and whether or not you've got a problem and where that problem stems from. So with that, that is everything that I had for today. We've got a couple minutes left. The Q&A box is open, so if you have any questions, by all means, pop those in there. I'd be happy to answer those, and we'll leave that open for just a couple of minutes. But I definitely appreciate everybody's time and attendance today, and doing this webinar was a lot of fun for y'all, so definitely appreciate that. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and close that up. We will send out the slides after the webinar is closed, sometime probably later on today or early tomorrow. And then the recording will be on the website, and it'll be accessible to everybody who signed up for this webinar as well. So I appreciate everybody's time and attention today, and have a great rest of your day.